It is my pleasure to welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today in this webinar hosted by the Urantia Association Education Committee. I want to share with you a quick protocol. We ask you please, during the meeting, you mute yourself if you're not speaking to avoid disturbing background noises. If you want to speak, please raise your hand and unmute yourself. Please use the chat only for webinar-related questions. And if you can, please use headphones to improve sound quality and to reduce echo background noises when speaking. Please do not type when your microphone is not muted. This session will be recorded for future study purpose use. The videos will be made available to the public in the Urantia Association YouTube channel. Turn off your camera if you do not like your image being used for records, and ask to speak off the record at any time when you do not want your say to be part of the videotape. This way your part will be cut out of the video during editing. Today we have the participation of Urantia Association's President Chris Wood, who will present the theme Modern Strategies for Spreading the Urantia Teachings. And now, let me introduce you Chris Wood briefly. Chris has been active in the Urantia community for 20 years now. He has served in various capacities for several conferences, boards, and committees, including 6 years as the president of the International Service Board for Urantia Association. Chris lives in Green Bay, Wisconsin, USA, with his wife and 2 growing boys, and works as an air traffic controller. He spends his spare time toiling in the beginning stages of coffee roasting, soap making, and woodworking. Thank you, dear Chris, for your willingness to serve. The session is yours.
Thank you, Jeannie. And thank you all for coming. I love these Saturday seminars we've been doing for more than a year now. I think they are a great service and a great way to use these new technologies we have available to come together from across the world. I mean, for this group of people to be in the same place at the same time would cost thousands of dollars and who knows how many hours of coordination. And instead, we're able to do it from the comfort of our own homes or wherever you happen to be. So this is great. Thank you all for coming. You were told to raise your hands if you'd like to speak. I will try to see your hands. Jeannie will also try to see your hands. And if it seems like I don't see your hand, feel free to interrupt. This should be a conversation. The thoughts I'm putting forward are my thoughts, but many of you have much better ideas to bring forward. So don't feel like you're interrupting anything profound that I'm saying. And furthermore, part of what Urantia Association is trying to do is to bring forward the best ideas from across the world so that we can share them between countries, between communities and cities and whatnot. And so if you've got a program that's working in your town, speak up and share it, especially when we're talking about dissemination, because that's what Urantia Association is here to do, is to bring these good ideas that are working and share them. So just because I might not be mentioning something doesn't mean it's not worth mentioning. It just means that I don't know about it. So, so yes, open conversation. Feel free to chime in whenever you'd like. I think I'd like to start with a little quote about dissemination, and we'll take this from paper 132. This is Jesus in Rome. Jesus did not devote all of his leisure time in Rome to this working of preparing men and women to become future disciples of the oncoming kingdom. He spent much time gaining an intimate knowledge of all races and classes of men who lived in this, the largest and most cosmopolitan city in the world. In each of these numerous human contacts, Jesus had a double purpose. He desired to learn their reactions to the life that they were living in the flesh, and he was also minded to say or do something to make their life richer and more worthwhile. His religious teachings during these weeks were no different from those which characterized his later life as teacher of the 12 and preacher to the multitude. Always the burden of his message was the fact of the Heavenly Father's love and the truth of his mercy, coupled with the good news that man is a faith son of this same God of love. So, like Jeannie said in the introduction, about 20 years ago, I took a little trip up to Chicago and met the people there at 533 at the foundation. And they immediately put me to work, as the good people there did. And I really credit Tonya Bainey and Kathy Jones for putting me to work the first time I walked in and having me put stamps on envelopes, which was a much bigger project back then than it is today. There were always mail to go out and always stamps that needed to be put somewhere. And so I was immediately put to work, and I really appreciated that. And it really made me feel like my time was being used in a way that, you know, helped further the work of the foundation. Around this time, as I got to know people, I think there were several major philosophical debates that were going on in our community. I'll highlight 3 of them. One was whether our community should have a single publisher and translator of our Urantia efforts, or if we should have multiple efforts going on. One side would argue that we're not a large enough community to support multiple translation efforts, and we would be wasting our limited resources competing against ourselves. Instead of 2 efforts to translate into a single language, we could have 2 efforts to translate into 2 languages. The other side argues that competition is a good thing to keep quality up and costs down. And there are multiple examples of businesses in the world who have a single entity with multiple competing efforts in one marketplace. And so this debate about this continues to this day, and luckily we won't have to cover that in this workshop. But a second debate that was happening was about pagination. Was there wisdom in attempting to make sure that every printing of the Urantia book, be it a paperback or a hardback of every size, of every translation, to make sure that every page had the same pagination, so that when someone said, turn to page 753, everyone in every language would be seeing the same material? One side said that this was great for our ability to get to know each other and to be able to reference the same materials. The other side said that it was too big of effort for too small of return, and that instead we should focus on paper numbers and section numbers for references as opposed to just page numbers. Now, in the 20 years since this time, this particular argument has largely disappeared because technology has changed how we see the book. The Urantia book is now a program on our computers or our phones or our tablets and whatnot. The Urantia book is no longer 2,097 pages long. It's now 1 page, one very long page on my phone or on my tablet. And so technology has made this particular debate somewhat obsolete. The third debate is the wisdom of going slow or going fast in our dissemination efforts. And this is the one we're here to talk about today. Whether or not it is wisest to spread the Urantia teachings from person to person in personal contact and personal efforts to spread these teachings, or whether we should take a mass dissemination approach. Whether we should have commercials during the Super Bowl or during the World Cup, whether we should focus upon getting Oprah Winfrey to read the book and recommend it to her followers so that millions of copies could be sold in a week. This debate also continues today, but some people argue that technology has changed the nature of this debate too. After all, I can now put up a website, and this website could reach, in theory, billions of people if only I could trick billions of people into clicking on the website. Others maintain that this mass dissemination effort doesn't work, that in the long run, what is proven to be the best, most reliable way to to spread the teachings of the Urantia Book is through person-to-person communications and our contacts. I want to talk for a bit about then what is the purpose of dissemination. What are we talking about when we talk about dissemination of the Urantia Book and the Urantia Teachings, and how can we shape it? So this is where technology is going to come and bite us, because I am going to attempt to share my screen, but more than once, my screen does not want to be shared. And so we'll see if this works for us today or not. Dun, dun, dun. All right, by chance, are people seeing a large picture of a smiley Jesus?
No, this is Mark. No.
No one is seeing a large picture of a smiley Jesus. That's a problem.
Sometimes it just takes a while for it to come up, Chris. Just wait
All
a
right.
bit. Do a bit of talking and just leave it.
All right.
Yes.
Got it now.
All right. Slideshow from the beginning. Okay. So, modern dissemination efforts, and how do we think about these things? We talk about the world in many different ways, and the last thing I know that we need in today's world is another way to subdivide the population. But nonetheless, that is what I'm going to try to do today, is to try to categorize a very large population of people. Now, we can do this in many ways. We can do this in the realms of education, or in wealth, or in age, or in our health, or in our religion. And these divisions can be useful for organizational planning, but they're less useful when we get down to the individual. So, that said and acknowledged, I'm going to propose a following division for how we think about the entire Earth's population. And furthermore, I think that we can think about our outreach and our dissemination efforts in terms of this division of the population. So, the first section of people is those who have never heard about the Urantia Book nor been touched by one of its teachings. This is your basic group. These people have probably heard Urantia-like teachings in their life, but they've perhaps never had that aha moment. And I'm stealing this example from Jeff Waddles, and he might be stealing it from someone else, but I'm stealing it from Jeff. But there's two versions of Jesus that are emphasized in Christianity. And one is the Jesus of the cross who is sacrificed for the sins of the world. And the other is the Jesus who cleanses the temple, who chases away all those who stand between man and God. And it's this second version of Jesus that Dr. Waddles would emphasize in his classes. And for me, this was a great aha moment. It was a realization that we can reach American Christians by emphasizing Jesus of the temple. And perhaps this Jesus of the temple had not yet been emphasized in their own, as an important part of their own religions. So there are many aha bridges we can build within our cultures, whether it's the Jesus of Christianity, or whether it's Norman Lear sitcoms, or the ideals of Star Trek, or the works of J.J. Benitez in the Spanish-speaking worlds, or even basic moral philosophy. It's out there, these teachings. They're in the ether. And so they just need to be shaped in a particular religious way, and we can do that. A second division of people would be those who have never heard about the Urantia Book, but they have been touched by one of these teachings. And there's millions of people in the world who grasp some Urantia-like teachings and are searching for significance in what they've grasped. They might have heard Pope Francis say, this is a quote, "Thank you to those who have brought joy to us in their art with beauty, which is a path to reach God. Beauty brings us to God, and a true testimony brings us to God, because God also is the truth. He is beauty, he is goodness, and a testimony given to serve is good. It makes us good people because God is good. It brings us to God. All that is good, all that is true, all that is beautiful brings us to God because God is good, God is beautiful, God is the truth. This is from a speech he gave in Philadelphia on his tour of the United States back in 2015. Or they might have heard Rob Bell, who's one of my favorite Christian preachers. And he says in the first chapter of one of his books, there is something in the air. We're in the midst of a massive rethink. A movement is gaining momentum. A moment in history is in the making. There is a growing sense among a growing number of people that when it comes to God, we're at the end of one era and the start of another. An entire mode of understanding and talking about God is dying, and something new is being birthed. These ideas are out there in the world. They're just not attached to the Urantia Book. But these are teachings that the Urantia Book emphasizes and that we can use to help people's understanding of God and their relationship with God. These ideas might have taken root in their mind, and they're praying about them, and people are searching for others who can help bring meaning to their truths. And we can help with this. We can be like Jesus and ask them questions and help them vocalize these beliefs that they already have and to own them and make them in their lives. So that's the second group, those who have been touched by the teachings that are within the book but don't know the Urantia Book itself. A third group then is those who have heard about the Urantia Book. Now maybe it's their friend or their sister who studies this book that we all love. Maybe they heard about it on a podcast. Maybe they saw something on the internet. Maybe they met a random person at a coffee shop once. So what do they think about the Urantia Book? Do they think about the people who read the Urantia Book as being normal or weird or hippies or mystics? These are the people who have heard of the Urantia Book but for some reason have never read any of it. So what is that reason? Most likely it's a simple truth that they've not had enough interactions with the Urantia Book yet. The people who work in sales say that there is a process to get to a sale, and that this process involves multiple positive interactions with an idea before the person is willing to make that purchase to buy. And depending on what it is and who you're talking to, it might be 3 positive interactions or 7 positive interactions or 12 positive interactions. It probably is a difference between if you're recommending a book versus a car, I'm sure. But your conversations with a person is an opportunity to leave them with a positive interaction with the Urantia Book. You can leave them with one of these 3 or 5 or 7 good interactions with the idea of the Urantia Book, and eventually they'll pick one up and they'll start to read it. A fourth group is those people who have read a little bit of the Urantia Book. They're out there. There's about 1 million books of copies of the Urantia Book that have been distributed, but only about 25,000 unique names on the various database rules out there. So, even discounting those of us who own a dozen Urantia books, and I know myself and my wife, we seem to each own at least a dozen Urantia books. There seems to be a large number of people who have read some of the Urantia Book, but who have never contacted an organization or pursued the Urantia community. But they're out there. My wife was reading the Urantia Book in a coffee shop once, and she was approached by a man who owned a Urantia Book but had never read much of it, even though he remembers liking what he had read. And then a few weeks later, they met up again at the same coffee shop, and he had pulled the book off his shelf and was reading it again. These updates continued throughout the year, even though he never showed up at one of our study groups, until more than a year later when they started a study group just there in the coffee shop, him and my wife. And now the study group has expanded more and more as a second side study group, this coffee shop study group. That starts just because a person sees it, another person reading it in a coffee shop. So they're out there. We know they're out there. And those of us who are involved in the social organizations or the book publishing organizations, we know because we hear people come up and say, I've been reading the Urantia Book for 20 years and I've never made contact with anyone before. So they're out there. A fifth group are those who are active Urantia Book students, but they're not necessarily involved in the Urantia community. This is a group of unknown size, but who nevertheless we do know exist. A 2012 survey that was conducted by the Foundation, the Fellowship, and the Association found that 65% of respondents had never attended a study group for the Urantia Book. And these were people who were engaged enough in the Urantia Book to receive our communications and invested enough to take at least 15 minutes out of their day to respond to an internet survey. But 65% of them, 2/3 of them, had never attended a Urantia Book study group. The next group are those who actually attend study groups, and this is kind of an open term in this sense of organizing people. But this term I mean to symbolize people who take minimum engagement in the Urantia community. So they might attend a physical study group, or they might be involved in an internet study group, where they're engaged enough to attend these online discussion groups, or maybe attend a yearly event, if not weekly events. But they're people who are known, who are out there. If you take this 7 degrees of separation idea, they're within a few degrees of everyone within the Urantia community. They know someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows Jeannie. The next group are those who are active in the Urantia community. These are the people like us, everyone in this seminar, who attend seminars, or we attend conferences, or they serve in an organization or on a committee from time to time. They vote in elections. They let their opinions be known. The next group is the hyperactive group. These are the people who will donate a significant amount of time to a Urantia project. They might serve on a council or a governing board. They're willing to donate time every week for years at a time toward the Urantia community. And then finally, the smallest group are the ultra actives. Those are organization leaders who are willing to dedicate part of every day to the Urantia community for sometimes years at a time. Now listen, this seminar is not going to be focused on groups 4 through 9, but I would be remiss if I didn't add that our organizations should encourage people to move freely between these groups, between those who just attend study groups and those who are ultra active. There's always going to be a small group of people who never will step down, who will just trade project to project and will dedicate their lives to the promotion of the Urantia Book. And yes, we need these people. But a healthy community like ours, we need to have shared leadership responsibilities and a mosaic of voices stepping up. It takes active dedication to maintain this rotation of leadership that our organizations rely upon, but a healthy organization has a rotation of leadership. Urantia Association International, our International Service Board, recently had elections. We do this every 2 years to replace roughly half of our board. So we had 5 positions up for election. Of the 5 positions that were up for election, 1 person ran for re-election, which is great. 1 person stepped down because she was term limited, because we have term limits at the international level of the association. Of the 3 remaining, 2 of them stepped down after their first term, and it was great. They said they were willing to give 4 years of their time and then step back to dedicate to other projects. And we had other people step up. 1 person served a term and then decided to step down from that position and go and assume another position in a different committee on our ISB, which is also great. That's what we need to have happen within the Urantia community, is more people willing to say, I've got 2 years to give, or I've got a year, or I've got 4 years. And then they feel free to step aside and let someone else step up. So, my parenthetical aside, we can now return to where we're supposed to be, which is here. But I would be remiss as the president if I hadn't mentioned that. So this is where we're focusing here on our dissemination efforts. Those who've either never been touched by a teaching or the book, or those who know the teachings but not the book, those who've heard about the Urantia Book but don't read it, or those who are just reading some of the Urantia Book. If we're to have a random conversation at a coffee shop, or to ingrain Urantia teachings into a non-religious scenario, or to give a religious presentation that may or may not mention the Urantia Book, we need to know who our audience is and what our goals for that group is. Obviously, things are different for each individual, and I would suggest that group goals be first to not sound crazy when we're talking about the Urantia book. My mother gave us advice as a children. I have 5 brothers. I'm one of 6 boys, and the advice she gave all of us was first to act normal every chance we get. And it's the best advice I've ever gotten in my life, and I extend it to my own children, and I extend it, in fact, to the entire Urantia community. If we're given the option, we should try to sound normal. And then I would suggest that our goals, if first is to not sound crazy, but second, to move them up one level. To get rid of this green level of people who've never heard of the Urantia book and never been touched by the teaching, and instead give them a teaching of the Urantia book. Help inspire an aha moment within them. This doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be talking about the Urantia book, but instead we're going to be highlighting some idea or ideas that are involved in the Urantia book to pass along to them. One of their, say, what we talked about, this 3 to 5 to 7 good interactions with people. Well, we can have a good interaction with people without telling them it comes from the Urantia book. Jesus, walking around Rome, would do this to people. He wasn't always trying to recruit future leaders. Sometimes he was just trying to have good interactions with people. So I, Chris Wood, I'm a philosopher by training. In college, I studied philosophy. In fact, I used to teach some introductory courses, and my favorite course to teach was simply Philosophy 101, Introduction to Philosophy. Introductory courses translate a subject into a new language so that these ideas can be better understood. And I like that idea of taking what might literally be a lifetime of work and translating it down into 1 hour's worth of reading and 1 hour's worth of lecture. You have to provide enough of a highlight and a hook into any subject that it might grab the attention of a student, enough depth that it shows why it's worthwhile for a lifetime's pursuit and a career of study, and enough hints of future studies to give the student a future path forward. But it also provides enough of a structure and a closure so that the 99% of students who are listening to this lecture and are not fascinated enough to dedicate their lives to it, they can still recall it sometime later. So they might hear utilitarianism and remember, oh yeah, that's the one where you're judging happinesses and trying to create the most amount of happiness points in society. And it's great for group decision making, but it might be flawed as an individual moral system, right? I believe the same is true for the Urantia book. We are so enthused by these teachings that we want to treat every person as if they're one of this 1% who are going to latch on to it and fold it into our life pursuits. But we end up doing a disservice to the vast majority of people who could leave with just a vague notion of the Urantia book. They could leave with this notion of Urantia. Yeah, I've heard of these people. They're the ones who are into a direct relationship with God in an organized universe. And I've met some of these people and they're normal. That's a successful interaction about the Urantia book for 99% of the population. So that should be our first goal with every outreach and every dissemination effort we have. Urantia book students are normal. First, we do no harm is the Hippocratic Oath. I think should have a similar warning. First, do not sound crazy. After they've had this aha moment, then we let them know about the Urantia book. This is perhaps the place of our biggest error where most of us need training. We meet someone with a great Urantia-like thought, and we mistakenly try to convert them into full-fledged members of the Urantia community. We try to skip too many steps. Someone who's just off the streets hearing about the Urantia book, and suddenly we want to put them on a committee or a council somewhere. We have to let people know that the idea of reading the Urantia book is an idea that they have for themselves, not an idea that you've tried to hammer into them. It's where this introductory philosophy training comes into play. Except the thing is, you don't get 1 hour's worth of reading and 1 hour's worth of lecture with most people you meet off the street. You get 7 seconds. That's how long you get to make a first impression. And if you've mastered that 7 seconds, then you might get another 30 seconds. So we all have 7 seconds to provide a hook that grabs people's attention and leaves them wanting more information. But at the same time, we need to provide a complete story that sticks in their heads so that the 99% of the people who do not get hooked, they can later recall the word Urantia again, and it doesn't sound crazy. Urantia, I've met these people once, they sound normal. 2013, the foundation, the association, the fellowship hired a media training expert team to come in and give us some media training because we were in desperate need of it. And one of the things they said is we need to stop sounding crazy. One of the examples they gave us was that we refer to ourselves as human beings. We do this all the time in our Urantia circles. We refer to human relationships and human interactions and human materials. People don't call themselves human beings. People call themselves people. And so when we're referring to human beings, other people think that we're sounding like an other group. You are the humans and we are someone else. And it made us sound nuts. We need to keep referring to ourselves as people. But this is part of the Urantia language. For 60 years in our community, we don't mean human beings as the other. We mean human as opposed to divine. There's divine relationships and there's human relationships. There's divine motivations and there's human motivations. That's what we mean when we talk about human. But to outsiders, it sounds like we think of ourselves as aliens. And so this was the first lesson that the media training people told us was, start referring to ourselves as people and not as human beings. So we've got 30 seconds. Can we talk about 30 seconds about the Urantia teachings without going overboard? We need a beginning, a middle, and an end, a hook that might attract some questions, a complete narrative for those who don't. If that works, maybe we get to speak for a little bit more time. Maybe we get 3 minutes worth of time to talk to other people. And so what can you say? My advice is always, instead of talking about the Urantia book for 3 minutes, if we get 3 minutes, instead we talk about a personal story that connects our core belief to our real life. And so, look, I'm a parent. I've got a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. It's what I do most of my time is be a parent. And so I tell a story about parenting. And I connect it to I connect faith and love and parents and children. But it's a different story for everyone, and you get to have your own hooks into how you experience your faith. So this is basic outreach training. I think it's a duty of each of us in the Urantia community to prepare for this. I think it's a good thing for us to do within our study groups. And I think it's a duty of our social organizations is to provide this type of outreach training. But here's where things take a turn, because when we talk about outreach training with this, and we've talked to someone in the coffee shop, the second thing we do, a person does whenever we get up to go to the bathroom or whenever they've stopped having this conversation is they now go and they take out their phones and they do a quick search for the word Urantia, and now what have they got? And so now our entire idea of building someone toward Urantia book and toward building them and stepping them up these levels gets completely thrown aside, because now the internet has been introduced, and what do they find on the internet? And so this is where we now need to talk about modern methods of outreach. We've had this idea of the old methods of outreach, but now it's time to start talking about how we need to build the internet into this. So now is a good time to take a little break and say, hey, if you have any questions, any comments about what we've talked about so far, anything you'd like to bring forward. Too often in these sort of situations, no one speaks up when we move on, so be completely comfortable with that. But if you have a question or a comment to make, now is a good time. Who's ready to share? I see Mark Kurtz first. Mark, talk, please.
Just very briefly, what you've really been talking about is the word attraction. Either we attract people to teachings or we repel, and you very nicely brought up Jesus as a person who attracts. I'm done.
Thank you, sir. John Hales.
First of all, let me thank you for being so so many familiar faces that I haven't seen for many years. Conrad being one of them, and so I'm really enjoying being with you all. I've been on a project with my church for the last 4 years, so I really resonates with what you're talking about, needing my new church family where they are. So my job is sort of somewhat easier in that I'm relating part 4 to my church family, and I've learned. I physically have not brought the Urantia book into the church because when I finally gained confidence that I can speak, and the Spirit of Truth will guide me in what and how to react to questions, whether it be in Bible study or just meeting people one-on-one. So I just encourage everybody to get out there in their community and start a project, and you'll be led.
John, Cheryl.
Is that me?
Yes.
So what you said at the very end before you stopped, Chris, about now they're on the internet and they're going to see everything that's there on the internet. Usually when I'm speaking one-on-one with people, I try to direct them to a specific website for more information, just hoping that if they have a recommendation for where to go to find information, that they will not get lost in everything else. And since the foundation's website, urantia.org, is where I usually go, that's what I recommend to them. And so far that seems to be working fairly well. That's just what I do. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you. Francine.
Hello, everybody. Like you were saying, Chris, I also never talk of the Urantia book. It looks alien for other people. But what I like to do is, like you, I share my personal experience through the teachings. I show people that knows me how I get through a challenge. And one thing I always say is that the connection I made with God make things that were humanly impossible to do was what with the divine in me makes it possible to do. So people are always, mostly when they are feeling an experience and living an experience and they're seeking for advice, I always like to reflect on what they say and tell them about teachings I've learned. And then if I light a curiosity, they ask me where this teaching comes from. And this is a door. Like you said, we have to know where the people stands for. Some people are not ready, but some people are. Thank you.
Jim.
I'm wondering about publishing, not the book itself, but secondary works. There are a lot of secondary works that are Urantia, even have the name Urantia in them, but a lot of secondary works like mine that are, as you said, like the Pope, adjacent and appeal to a larger group. But it's very difficult to get published, self-publishing included, even though some people think that's easy. But if the Urantia Book organizations could have a publishing wing and a few people that then say, yeah, this work is good enough that we can publish it, I think that would help quite a bit. You know, it doesn't have to be. We're talking Urantia philosophy. It just has to be truth, beauty, and goodness, and all the other things that are consistent with the Urantia Book, inspired by the Urantia Book. Thank you.
Thank you.
Space mute.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm totally blind, so I'm not sure what the raised hand control is. But there's one group that you have not addressed so far, and that is, what do you do when you have people that are hear about the Urantia book and they are hostile to it? For example, when I asked someone this question before, they were like, well, you should just tell them about Jesus. Well, the problem is, I am from Alabama, excuse me, and in Alabama, it's if you're not Protestant, conservative, fundamentalist Christian, if you join any other faith, you're a member of a cult. So with them, it's not a matter of, you can talk about Jesus all day long, but if it's not the Jesus in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, then we got a problem. So I've encountered at least one person that is openly hostile as far as to the Urantia Book teachings, and they're under the impression, well, you belong to a cult. So how should we respond to that particular group? Okay, I'm going to attempt to mute myself now.
Yeah, thank you. Part of our media training from 2013 was to address the term cult. And they said, don't use the term cult, don't repeat the term cult. If someone uses the word cult with you, don't say it back to them. It's one of these bad words that you never repeat. Anyway, I think that probably a lot of people have their own experience with this, especially those in the United States who are from the Southern Bible Belt. My experience has always been to use the Bible. Now, I'm one of these people who didn't read the Bible until after I read the Urantia book. And so when I read the Bible, I saw the Urantia book teachings in it. And so it's easier for me to highlight the parts of the Bible that are so wonderful and filled with Urantia type teachings. But I think we have, this is an entire wing of the Urantia community, those who are into Christian outreach. In fact, maybe another one of these great debates that was happening 20 years ago that continues today is, should the Urantia community be focused upon Christian outreach, or should we be focused in other sectors? And yeah, it's certainly still an open question. Bob, I see your hand's up.
Here. Okay, I'm unmuted. Well, I mean, I've made some adjustments simply because I wasn't very good at introducing the Urantia book. I mean, it didn't take me long to learn that I shouldn't lead with government on a neighboring planet. But at the same time, I was in, fundamentalist Christian circles to a certain extent, and later on became, part of the pulpit supply for a major denomination. And I just basically developed sermons that used biblical references, but used interpretations, the higher interpretations that were provided by the Urantia papers. One of the things that, I was hoping to get out of this is the extent to which we are booksellers or we are, purveyors of the material that's, contained within the Urantia papers. And I would offer an insight from paper 142, section 3, where I'm sorry, that was the wrong one. Paper 151, section 4, where it says the kingdom of heaven is like the leaven which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal, and in this way it came about that all of the meal was leavened. I think there's also an interpretation of becoming fishers of men that might be useful to us, and that is that we don't just throw any old bait out there. I mean, we go down to see what the fish are feeding on, and we fashion a lure that's not too far removed from the habits of those that we're interacting with. That's pretty much all I have to say.
Well, that is very much true, and it's a discussion that's happening across the world in our Urantia community. We don't necessarily say sellers of books, but distributors of books. Are we trying to just get more people to read the Urantia book, or are we trying to share the teachings that are within the Urantia book and get those teachings to become universal? And so Urantia Association has a 3-year study going on right now about living the teachings. And we're asking our national and local associations and continental associations to develop studies and conferences around this idea of sharing the teachings, or I'm sorry, living the teachings. And so for those of you who will be in Europe this summer, looking around for Europeans, The Estonian conference in July will be on this topic, and it's I know I'll be there, and I've already seen some of the work that's being developed. It's going to be very, very useful. I encourage everyone to get over to Estonia this summer, if that helps. If not, of course, I'm sure it'll be broadcast online, so attend using your camera.
Chris, we have 3 hands raised. Cecilia, Brent, and Alonso. In this
Thank
order.
you.
Okay.
All right, let's go through these 3, and then we'll continue with the presentation.
Cecilia?
All right. Hello, everybody. Hi, Chris. Hi, Jeannie. I love what you said. It's exactly what we are happening all around the world. And that technology, what is going through is asking how we're going to get the young people. Because the websites are all kind of content, not the right ones. And they go to YouTube and they go to wrong contents, okay? So I think one of the efforts we have to do is going to these young people who are searching for who I am, where I'm going, what is the reason of my being here in this planet, am I alone in this planet, there is more planets, or all the questions about existence. So I think we need to put more effort in our website be in the first place in Google, and also in the searchers, and also we're talking Occidental, but there is another Chinese or other languages, continents, no? And also the fact that we are talking about a background of Christians, Catholics, okay? We talk about Jesus. We have to talk about Michael, because very few people know that in the India he was known as the scribe, I don't know the translation in English, Escriba de Damasco. So when I talk to young people, the first thing is they reject everything related to religion. And then when I talk to them and I said, no, this is not about religion. This is about your connection with your creator. And then they stay and they start listening. And this is one thing that I think we need to put more effort in the organization. Second is we have to add. I feel this is mandatory, and every moment since the last 2 years, I feel it bigger and bigger. We need to add that Michael came and also works with the Ministra Divina. Jeannie, you can translate that, Ministra Divina in English.
Divine Minister.
Yeah, because it's 2 aspects, the male and the female. And we live in a very strong society where men, even in religion, all kind of religion, I think except the Orientals, I'm not sure, the young people, they don't want that. They reject immediately that. So this is my experience to contribute to your research, so you can put more effort in the organization, because the technology is changing everything. So we need to get through that. When we have fairs, as we said, we don't sell books. You can get, if you don't want to buy it, don't buy it. You can get it through the application. The people get crazy, really? Okay, this is the only thing I wanted to say.
Thank you. Who was second?
Oh, thank you, and thank you, Chris, for hosting this this meeting. I haven't talked about this subject out loud very often. This how we disseminate. When I listen to your description of the layers or the circles of different of the population, I think that's a fair thing to do, is to divide the world up in that way. I have divided the world by adding another layer, but it actually is part of the first four. It's Urantia Book Ready Truth Seekers. You would find Urantia Book Ready Truth Seekers within the first four layers that you described. So this may seem like a glib comparison, but if you want to find a life mate, life partner, you put yourself out as being willing to fall in love, and if you are willing to do that, or you then have to put yourself in situations where you're going to find somebody. Like, you can't be willing to fall in love but not go out and search. So you might go in to John Hales's example. You in that case, you work within a church, and you might find somebody like that suits you in that community. Well, to me, the Urantia Book, it's not falling in love in a sense of two human beings, but if you're a truth seeker, I remember when I came across the Urantia Book, I was Urantia Book ready. I'd never heard about it. I was a very upset and may I use the expression, pissed off truth seeker, because I didn't have the available to me the answers to things I thought we were entitled to as human beings, as people. So we, in my view, as in our outreach, need to make sure that Urantia Book ready truth seekers have the best chance of coming in contact with the Urantia Book. And to me, we are unseen helpers, are partners in this. So we, in our spreading of the book, which is the physical book, we need to make sure it's on shelves everywhere possible. But as readers interested in disseminating, we need to put ourselves in situations like John Hales has said, where we are in contact with other truth seekers, and then you just use your best discernment to decide whether that another person in that group is Urantia Book ready. Yes, it's a qualitative judgment, but we do that all the time. So anyway, so I would just say our efforts physically with the book, and then as individual readers, is to somehow understand and look for and find and be ready to attract in the Urantia Book ready truth seekers. Not all truth seekers are Urantia Book ready. And you know what? There's billions of people out there. The population of Urantia Book truth seekers is still very large, and we would have all the work we could possibly do if we knew who those were. Excuse me for the long intervention.
Alonso.
Thank you, Jeannie. Hi, everyone. First of all, pardon my poor English, but what I want to say is I shared a couple of quotes of the book in the chat. I want to point out that I think the revelators didn't want us to make the Urantia Book very important. I think that they are emphasizing the gospel of the kingdom, which is the brotherhood and the parenthood of the Father. So maybe I think Urantia Book is not for everyone. You know, I believe there are 7 billion people in the world, and everyone that is here in this reunion loves the Urantia book and thinks and believes that this book is amazing and probably changed their lives. But I think it's not the case for the 7 billion people that are living in the planet. So we need to focus not, in my opinion, not in the book, but in the gospel of the kingdom, because that's what Jesus taught us, what Jesus taught his disciples. And I think that's the only way, because we can give away hundreds or thousands of Urantia books in the streets, and that does not guarantee that people is gonna read it, understand it, and even less apply its teachings. So I believe Urantia book it is great for readers, for people that are used to read. So book fairs are very suit for sharing the book, because there is people that actually read, so they are not afraid of facing a 2,000 pages book, but not everyone. So I don't know how, but I think we need to start talking about talking this out, because the gospel of the kingdom has been missing for 2,000 years. You know, Jesus taught that gospel of kingdom, but the rest of humanity failed to share it with the whole world. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Green, you have something to say?
Yes, thank you, Chris.
Okay.
I agree with you, Alonso, that we need to be part of this revelation, of course, but we need to be testimonies, living testimonies of this revelation. So one thing that I do is that I will use my Facebook page or wall, and I will publish beautiful thoughts, which are all valuable on families, children, true beauty and goodness, without never mentioning the Urantia book. And I receive so many comments from people that would say, Lynn, you always publish beautiful things. And this is a way for truth to be out there without mentioning the Urantia book, because it's not everybody who's ready for this. But everybody is always ready for something that is beautiful, to hear something beautiful, something that will resonate within them. So this is one thing that I do, and to live my own life as an example, the best I can. That's what I wanted to say.
Well, thank you all for your comments. I think I'll add a little bit to this, because we're going to talk about this a little bit later, which is who is the audience for the Urantia book? And who are we looking for? And so we all have different words. Some people use the words, they're looking for seekers, truth seekers, or people who are questioning. I use the term disgruntled. That's one that makes sense in my mind. And apparently it doesn't necessarily translate well in other languages, but disgruntled's like an active unhappiness. And so it's not a passive unhappiness. It's not, oh, I don't like the church. It's, I don't like the church because they're not providing what I think we need. It's not providing the right spiritual insights. They're actively not happy with what they have in front of them. And so we find disgruntled Catholics or disgruntled Christians or disgruntled Muslims or disgruntled Buddhists, disgruntled anyone. My parents read the Urantia book, but I would say in my teenage years, I was a disgruntled atheist. I actively didn't like what the organized religions were bringing to me, and so I was actively rejecting that. But I also just didn't like what the agnostics and the atheists had to offer. So it's those people who are actively unhappy that I think of as our Urantia audience. And so people who are happy with their spiritual lives, that's great. Someone who's happy with the church they're in, you know, they're happy with what they have. We can add to it. We can help bring out some spiritual fruits within their lives, but they're not the ones who are actively looking for something else. And so I'm always out, you know, in my conversations, I'm always out looking for those who are actively unhappy and are looking for something else. So back to the conversation we're here to have, which is about the way technologies are changing this. I think we've all had some sort of horror story about talking to someone about the Urantia book, and then they go and they look online for something, and boy, what they find is not what we want them to find, right? It's not this progressive way of introducing the Urantia teachings and the Urantia book to someone. Instead, they go and they find a website that's filled with, you know, Urantia debunking and the bad science and the bad religion and the bad sociology and everything else that they want to highlight. Tamara Strumfeld at the foundation has one of my favorite stories, which is that she was attending a continuing education course for preparing to become she's now the executive director of the foundation. She was preparing for this course, and she was just taking this course with a bunch of other business people, and someone had a question about where she worked, and she talked with the professor about the Urantia Foundation, the Urantia book, and he seemed very receptive. And so the next day she was all happy. She was going to bring him a Urantia book, and she walks into the course about 5 minutes before anyone else, or before it was supposed to start, and there was the professor and about a handful of other students in the course, and they all had up on the big computer screen that was being projected for everyone a Urantia debunking site filled with all the crazy things in the Urantia book, and they all looked at her like, this is what you believe? And, you know, it's humiliating in that group setting. It is dispiriting for us as individuals trying to spread the Urantia book, but it's what we're up against. I think at the beginning of the internet, the Urantia community was a bit differential. Irma, I'm sorry, I see your hand. Do you have something to say? I don't want to ignore you. Irma? Irma?
Irma?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Hi, everybody. I was reading some time ago a document from Dr. Sadler, and he says they was here and listened for 20 years some words and different concepts before to know the old documents, the old papers for know the revelation. And I think we need to teach first the concepts to the people for they understand and feel the curiosity for know that what about these concepts, because it's true the people need here before to buy something in the store about any product, and the revelation is like this one. We need to teach first the concepts, the different words like a superhuman, super beings, and super universe. Many people think we have one universe, one universe. And a few days ago, somebody asked me, why you say Michael? Michael is the name, the spiritual name of Jesus. I say, no, I never heard that. And I remember about this letter right from Dr. Sadler before he dies. And I think it's very important teach the concepts first. And after introducing the book, I think is the revelation is for 1,000 years, but the humanity, the world is very fast now. It's not like the past century, and I think that, sorry, excuse me by my less English.
Well, thank you. In the beginning of our community, I think we had a sense of quality control, that we wanted to make sure that that what was expressed about the Urantia book that got out was of good quality and represented the Urantia book well. I think that throughout the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, this was a lot of what the organizations were focused upon, was making sure that that what little was known about the Urantia book out there in the world was of good quality. Mo Siegel, who's now the president of the foundation, he tells a story of his younger days when he was, he was the CEO of a company and was rising in the business world, and he found out that a business magazine was going to do a story on him, but they were also going to be about the Urantia book, and he's this weird guy in this weird religion who's leading a major tea company. And he was very stressed out, and he was making preparations to resign from his company because he didn't want this to get out and then the company would fall apart. And then he lucked out, and that the story wasn't what he thought. It wasn't the worst case scenario story that it could have been, and he was able to continue. But that was the fear early on, was that what was going to get out was going to be of a poor quality. We no longer have that luxury of quality control. Now the internet lets anyone who has an opinion about anything express it, and it is at least given equal weight on, in Facebook or on Google or anywhere anyone who wants to put it out there. I think in the early days of the internet, the Urantia community was a bit too differential to quality control. And we were hoping, we wanted to make sure that the foundation, the fellowship, the association put out their good websites, and that's what we would point them to. But what we lacked was quantity. And where this vacuum of quantity was lacking got filled in with quantity of other people. So as early as 5 years ago, if you went onto YouTube and you typed in Urantia, most of the first page would be filled with videos made by Gabriel of Urantia and his talks and his teachings. And when I saw that, I was very, I won't say I was panicked, but I saw that we needed to immediately fill in that gap. And so I immediately went out and talked to everyone and say, make videos, put them on YouTube. We need quantity out there, even if it's just you sitting in front of your computer camera talking about why you like the Urantia book, even if it's you sitting in front of your computer camera reading a paper of the Urantia book. We need quantity out there so that it fills in these gaps, and the quality will come. The quality will come with the people who are good at it, but we also need quantity. Same thing with web pages. We need quantity web pages as well. Just you talking about a blog about your Urantia book, it helps fill in the gaps that people are looking for, so that when people go and they do their Google search or they do their YouTube search, that they come up with a lot of people who appear to be normal, who are talking about the Urantia book and how it affects their lives and their everyday living. And they see that the Urantia community is a normal and spiritually progressive part of the spiritual development of the world. And I continue to emphasize this today. I would encourage all of you to go and make a video and put it on YouTube, or to do what you can, because that is what it turns out to be part of this new age we're in. That is not just quality control, but it's also quantity control. And so we need, we need videos out there. We need testimonials. We need people making this connection, which then brings us back to this first question that we put at the top, which is fast growth versus slow growth, slow outreach versus mass quantity outreach. And I think that this paradigm has shifted. It's no longer this question of, do we go slow or go fast? Is this the Super Bowl versus people you run into at the coffee shop? It's now about, can we build bridges and make these connections for people and their lives? And so what we saw in these discussions that we would have with people, as we saw between those who had, the earlier circles, never had seen the Urantia book or been touched by one of his teachings, those who had been touched by teaching but never seen the Urantia book, it's about building a bridge with that person between their lives and the teachings of the Urantia book, and bringing them forward through a circle, or bringing them forward to be introduced to the Urantia book and to read the Urantia book, and building these bridges that help bring them along. And so, we talk about, I talk about disgruntled, but we all have our own community. So John has his church and his community and the bridges he's able to build there. We talked at the beginning on a very introductory level woodworker, but that's a language I can speak. I've studied philosophy. That's another language I can speak. I'm an air traffic controller. That's another community I belong to. I can build the bridges between these communities I belong to and the Urantia community, and I can bring people forward that way. But it's the same thing with our with the internet and with our online outreaches. It's no longer about mass quantity, but it's about quality bridges that we can build through our Facebook posts, through our the YouTube videos we can put out there. What the problem that was always expressed with the idea of putting a web or an ad during the World Cup or during the Super Bowl is that these things don't build a bridge. So you're not building a bridge between the Urantia book and someone else. Instead, we're defining the Urantia book in the 30-second spot. We're putting the Urantia book in a box and trying to define it that way. And we know that this is not a good way of expressing the truths of the Urantia book. The Urantia book talks about, belief fixates and faith liberates, and that mass advertising becomes a fixation, not a liberation. One of my favorite quotes from the Urantia book is from the Farewell Discourse, which is, paper 180. Talking about the spirit of truth, Jesus says, you can know the truth, you can live the truth, you can experience the growth of truth in the soul and enjoy the liberty of its enlightenment in the mind, but you cannot imprison truth in formulas, codes, creeds, or intellectual patterns of human conduct. When you undertake the human formulation of divine truth, it speedily dies. And that was the problem we all saw with mass advertising, is we're taking the Urantia book, putting it into a human formula and code, and bring it out into the world and to essentially what would be a dead truth, this boxed in truth defining the Urantia book. And instead, what we want is this living sharing, this living bridge that I'm building between myself and you, between someone who has the Urantia book and someone who is questioning, who is seeking, who is disgruntled in the religious outlet that they have before them. And we're helping to build that bridge. Now we need to have that type of living, breathing religious experience, that bridge building on the internet, through the YouTube videos, through the Facebook interactions, in a way that that speaks to others. And the thing about it is that you're not necessarily defining the Urantia book in one box. Instead, you can say, here's my experience with the Urantia book. Here's what I love about the Urantia book. Here's how I relate the Urantia book to this other part of my life, be it woodworking or soap making or whatever it is. And there might be one other person out there or two other people out there, 0.01% of the people who are looking, but it makes that connection. It builds that bridge for them. And that's how we can keep the Urantia book from being from defining the Urantia book in a box and limiting it by a code. and rather we're building a bridge between what I know and what I have a passion for and others who might share the same passion. So not only are we bringing quantity to the internet, but we're also bringing quality and the ability to build that bridge between myself and someone who's seeking. And so this is, it's a new era for the Urantia community. It's about individual responsibilities to represent the Urantia book well, and being trusted to put that out there into the world through the internet or through our abilities for outreach, and be able to make that connection. That said, there are several great places that I like to point people. If I had my druthers, there are a couple places that, you know, if people are going to find out about the Urantia book, this is where I would point them. And of course, part of that is the major websites that our major organizations have to offer. I also like to point them to youth websites for people who are young, because of course, the Urantia book, you know, as I saw it recently in the at the conference in Brazil, we had a room full of young people in Brazil who were all reading the Urantia book, and they were all in there together with us older folks. And I count myself as one of the older folks in that situation, because it was a room filled with people in their 20s, and they were excited to meet one another, and we need to put them together. And so there's plenty of good youth websites out there and ways for people to get involved. I'm trying my darndest to share some good videos with you, but it doesn't look like, well, it's like maybe it will cooperate for a brief second. So it doesn't look like they want to cooperate, so I'm going to suggest you go on to YouTube and search for two sites if you haven't seen them already. One is Urantia Films, and the other is Urantia Draw. Urantia Draw, which is the one that at least pointing up on my screen, is in Portuguese, and they have Spanish translations, and they're actively, I believe, looking for a English translation, but it uses this hand-drawn technology to put sites out there, or sorry, to put information out there and to put videos out there in a way that is very appealing, even for those of us who don't see it. It doesn't look like this is going to work, so we'll just stop it. The other one is Urantia Films, which is Richard Jernigan, and I think that his work that he does is magnificent, and I suggest that, you know, it's one of the places that I point people to when I can. But just because there is some quality out there doesn't mean there can't be more quality out there. So please start sharing your videos, start sharing your passions with others online, because this is the way that people look for information, whether we like it or not. So, so it's important that we be represented. That said, if you have comments, if you have questions about this idea, this is where we need the most comments and the most ideas, because I can tell you that the association, the foundation, the fellowship, every time we get together, the leaders get together, this is what we're talking about, is how do we have better representation online? How do we have better representation for people who are seeking us through the internet? So if you have ideas, this is the place where you should bring them forward. If you have comments, questions, suggestions, please raise your hand and start talking.
Well, this is Chuck from Talladega again. One thing that I found is a podcast called Urantia Speaks. I haven't dug into it much, but from what little bit I have, it's basically a guy, and he had a co-host, but she left apparently shortly after the broadcast got started, and it was a breakdown of basically a cover-to-cover breakdown of the Urantia book. I downloaded the entire podcast, and it's 12.5 gigabytes. And yes, you have heard that correctly. And, you know, hopefully that may be something that some of you may want to look into as a teaching aid. Like I said, I have a study aid, I should say. Like I said, I have no idea if it's good or not, but it's, you know, it's something.
Alert.
I've never heard of Urantia Speaks before, and so thank you for bringing it up. I'm going to look into it. Someone on the chat mentions Urantia Radio, which I'm a big fan of myself. There's also other podcasts out there like the, oh heavens, what are the two major podcasts that we have?
Cosmic Citizen and Symmetry of Soul, if memory serves.
Those are the two major ones that I was thinking of, yes. But I'm going to look into Urantia Speaks.
Although I would also do it relatively quickly because I emailed the guy several months ago and he said he's going to keep it online for, I think he said a year, and then he's going to take it down. So it took him like you might as well say 4.5 years to do the whole thing.
Well, thank you.
Conrad raised his hand. Conrad.
Yes, Conrad.
Okay. Hi, everyone. First thing that I would like to focus upon is the complementarity between the Urantia book as such as a container of the 50 focal revelation and the living revelation. There's two dynamics associated with each. There's the dynamic of the book, where you want to protect your integrity of the original formulation of that message as it was presented in the English tongue, and the distribution of the book as such. And on the same interaction, you have the dynamic of the living revelation, where people live those teachings and share those teachings, not necessarily through a book, but through their experience. And those two dynamics work together, but they're different. The dynamic of the living revelation can go way beyond the limitations of the book. And that's very important. So whatever we do online, for instance, I go to some venues and I do live and share some spiritual experience with a host of individuals worldwide, never mentioning the book though. But as I chat and discuss with people, some people become quite interested in some of the aspects that I present and that come from the Urantia book. And eventually they come to read the book through those activities. So it is important to live those teachings and to socialize what we live in such a way that people will be attracted to the book. As to the book, if we push it aggressively, people tend to push back. And some organizations will consider that as a threat and it may backfire. So pushing the book too aggressively is dangerous. However, making it bold and allowing people to access the book and be attracted by the book, because we have to keep in mind that there's thought adjusters at play here who may lead people toward those teachings. There's a spirit of truth. There's a whole confederation of, I would say, unseen benefactors at work to do that work. We're not alone. So our task is to make sure that the book is available, that people know where to get it, how to access it, and let them come to the book. To me, that's the wisest way to spread the message. It's not the fastest, but it ensures the development of the quality in the readership. And quality should come before quantity. Quantity without quality may be detrimental. But if you have a quality readership, then quantity can come afterwards because you have a solid base. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Bob?
Hey, thanks. This kind of reminded me of a previous life as a person that was managing advertising, and you're always looking for a place to put your message. I used to do a lot of advertising on the subway system in Washington, D.C. because if a person didn't buy a magazine or they didn't buy a newspaper, they were manifesting all kinds of stimulus hunger, and they would read every word on those posters inside that car. When you were talking before about podcasts, I listen to probably about 3 hours of podcasts a day because I have to do a lot of driving, and I live in the mountains of Western North Carolina. So radio stations, you can hear it for 15 minutes and then you have to find another one. When I searched for Urantia using a podcast app that checks the Google indexes and the iTunes index and most of the other major podcast index, I only got one hit on the term Urantia as I was searching, and that was a podcast called the Urantia Book, and there were only 140 of the papers. Whoever the publisher was didn't bother to even finish posting all of the papers, and it's not like they were recording them from scratch. They were using the ones that the foundation had pretty much put into the public domain that were, I guess, recorded in the 1960s or something. So it's refreshing to me to hear you talk about the idea of everybody posting, because I think for years there was an attitude among the big three organizations: if it's not invented here, we're really not gonna support it. We're not going to amplify it. We're going to be pretty selective about what we choose. And so this has been a pretty refreshing conversation. But it seems to me, if the major organizations want to really be helpful with respect to secondary works, they could perhaps do a more thorough job of teaching people how to do the search engine optimization and some of the other things that would make these YouTube videos and these podcasts and other things come up. I think the podcast arena, there's so little material on there that's not, political. You can find TED Talks, you can find a few other things, but it's hard to find anything that's about Urantia themes. So that's pretty much all I have to say. Thanks.
I would like to say something if I can, Chris.
Yes, please.
Okay. Like a couple of months ago, I was invited because my background as a radio person, a producer, to check the programming of radiourantia.org. So I was listening, and everything was the reading, some interviews, some stuff, some music, just any kind of music. So I accept the challenge, and I start making a change, and we have already more than 30 people, 30 countries listening Radio Urantia in Spanish, okay? And we have some documents reading, but also we have some programs of Argentina conversation about the Urantia levels, for example. And also we have like small thoughts about the Urantia Book, about what Jesus said, or about the different part of the Urantia Book. And so and so and so. We have 24 hours, 12 hours programming that repeat twice. We increased 30% readers. And I was surprised because the most important, the most active, if we have an application, it's free application that you get from Google Store, Play Store. You download in a smartphone. We don't have an iPhone yet. And this, once you get this, you can have a chat. And the chat in WhatsApp for all the people who wants to be a member of this organization is amazing. Every testimony is people who were alone, who doesn't belong to non-organization, that they were reading for a long time ago through somebody who give the book, or most of them from internet. I tried to find out what do you have in English, and I didn't found. And it's not expensive, and it's 12 hours, and you have beautiful music in English, like Michael as a child. I think this is the name of the son of one of the Urantia members that wrote, a beautiful lady. This is one of the way, having a radio station. And this radio station not only has Urantia thoughts, he also have other positive thoughts. So the motto is, everything that acts is good. So we are trying to do more and more, and we are just starting. We are not in even our 10% of programming, because everything is voluntary, and we are lack of voluntaries. But the people who is there, like Irma is there. I think Jeannie also, her papers are read. This is amazing. And if you can do something like that in English, like a channel, not only testimonies being separate one by one, one channel, Urantia channel, and all different testimony from everybody, or different group of discussion, and everything we do is by Zoom, because there is one show, for example, that is made from one lady from Peru and one lady from Mexico, and they communicate in Zoom, and they all together get the recorder. There is the program from Argentina. They are like 8 people from different parts of Argentina that they communicate by Zoom, and they record it. It's amazing, the experience. I feel so alive doing this. And I feel that in English should be not only, we have también podcasts of that, okay? But alive. You can travel listening to the radio, listening good music, imagine, there is a lot of good music that help in English more than in Spanish, that can be done there. This is what I wanted to say.
Thank you. That's another resource that I wasn't even aware of, radiourantia.org. It's in Spanish, it looks like, from my brief thing. So for those of us who are trying to learn Spanish, it's another great resource studying our Spanish.